for joining us today. I'm sorry if I'm a bit in a dark space, but I've got this cubbyhole under these stairs, so I'm sure we're finding all weird and wonderful places to work from home. This is our first virtual event, although not quite a virtual reality event. Maybe next time we'll do that. But thanks everyone for joining. So as you know, the topic today, we're going to be talking about how VR can enhance employee training, some of the practical case study uses that we're working on, but also we've got a great panel of experts here talking about some of their experiences as well. But before we dive into that, just a little bit of background on who Nucco Brain are and sort of why we have some authority in this space. If it will let me go where I want it to go, yeah. So we do a range of things at Nucco Brain, ranging from corporate comms, where we're doing strategic sort of communications campaigns with some of our bigger clients. We do branded content, so sort of smaller pieces of content branded for more B2C audiences, but we generally work in the B2C space. And then it's the last two offerings that really relate to today's discussion panel. We specialize in learning development programs, so we do a lot of e-learning, and we do interactive and experiential learning as well, and that's kind of where we're going in with the VR space. And then we also do other experiential and interactive projects that might not necessarily be related to learning, but that's kind of in a nutshell what we do here at Nucco Brain. We have, obviously you can follow us on Instagram or any social channels like Twitter and that, if you want to follow on today. If you do have any questions that you'd like to post through social, obviously we're on a webinar now, so you probably just do it through this, but we have a couple of hashtags to use if you do want to speak about what's going on, so please feel free to use them. And some of the clients that we work with in our space, you can see here, as I mentioned before, generally corporate or commercial of some sort, generally a B2B audience or an internal comms, HR/training aspect. Some of the projects we're doing, we worked with the Arizona State University. I'll let Adam mention more about them in a minute. We worked with EDF as well, Southern New Hampshire University, and we've got a couple of other projects on the go with ANGLO, a big mining company, and then one that we can't really say much about, but we'll say as little as we're allowed to say in the next few slides. And that's pretty much it from me, but just a final sort of bit to sign off on is some nice things that our clients say about us. It's always nice when clients say nice things about you. We'll share this deck with everybody after as well, so we'll have a bit more time to look through it. But on that note, I will hand over to Adam, and you may hear from me a bit later on at the end of this session as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Mark. I'm Adam Blumenthal. I'm calling in from Rhode Island, USA, in between Boston and New York. I'm a vice president at Nucco Brain. I also serve as executive producer for many of our VR for Good projects. Most of them are training or education. In addition to my role at Nucco Brain, I'm also on the faculty of the computer science department at Brown University here in Rhode Island. At Brown, we've been doing R&D in VR since about 1990 and applying the technology in fields like surgery training in our medical school, archaeology, psychology, space and planetary exploration, among other fields. I teach a course in the computer science department called X plus VR, in which each student considers a specific use case, an X, and applies VR to it. So over the course of the semester, each student is developing a business case and a prototype for how VR can transform the use case of their choice. So I've had a lot of exposure to how VR can be applied in a bunch of different verticals. Now, quickly, Mark, if you'll go to the next slide, I just wanted to show a few use cases in which we at Nucco have applied VR in training context or in learning context. We just wanted to start with a few examples from our portfolio to demonstrate a kind of a range of different types of VR for training. The first example is with the social good group at one of the world's largest companies. And the project here is to address the problem of unnecessary use of force in police encounters. Often violence in police encounters is a failure in effective communications. So the goal of this project is to train police officers in the communication skills of de-escalation. So we're building these VR-based training scenarios that put the officers, put the trainees into very realistic and very stressful simulations where a digital character is presenting as as agitated or emotional or angry. And we're simulating the fast-paced and really high-pressure conversations that either lead to de-escalation, a successful outcome, or not, depending upon the words and the behaviors of the police officer. This is really interesting because the project weaves VR technology with speech recognition and AI. We're using the HTC Vive VR system, and so we're using the microphone that's built into the Vive. We take the audio from the police officer's speech, and then in a fraction of a second, we're converting the audio to text. In another fraction of a second, the system, the software is analyzing the text to understand or to try to understand what the police officer is saying. And then the system is also keeping a score of the digital character's emotional state. And then based on these things, the system sort of empowers the digital character to deliver back a spoken line. And in this way, we're enabling the conversation between the trainee and the digital characters. Next one, Mark, is a project with Anglo American. Anglo is a global mining company, and following some fatal accidents at a facility in South America, we were commissioned to create some realistic VR-based scenarios that teach industrial employees how to identify and avoid risks. We modeled an exact replica of one of their facilities and then populated the scenario or the environment with several learning modules that are based on what we have learned are the most common and dangerous risks. So we're helping industrial employees build a sort of virtual muscle memory, and through these simulated experiences that then carries over to their behavior in the real world. I know Jason from PwC has an interest in how VR can affect behavior change. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Next example, I know we have some attendees here from academia, from universities. So I'm sharing this example that we built for one of the largest universities in the US. We took 3 sections of the textbook for a neuroscience course that's called biopsychology, and we're giving students an immersive experience inside the brain. We worked with the professor to understand what are the topics in the course that are most difficult for students to learn and to understand from lectures and from reading the textbook, and we've made these components experiential. The example is relevant, I think, because it's learning in VR, first of all, but secondly, it's relevant because we're producing these VR experiences for the purpose of doing a randomized controlled trial. So we're going to have 60 students who will get this material by lecture and textbook, and then another 60 students will get lecture, textbook, plus the VR experience. So we'll be able to measure the impact that the VR has on comprehension, engagement, retention, and some other factors. Last example to share is another example of saving lives. LIFESAVER VR is an immersive experience for high school students that teaches the basic skills of CPR. The experience puts learners in a first-person perspective that immerses them in an emergency situation where someone's having a cardiac arrest. And then we walk the students through the proper steps and processes for performing CPR. The project was produced with the Resuscitation Council in the UK, who conducted a study on the efficacy of this VR-based approach versus traditional CPR training. And what they found was that there was a significant increase in knowledge retained 6 months after the training among the participants who used VR, and also, interestingly, a significant increase in the learners' confidence level about performing CPR. Thank you for indulging me in those few examples. We'll, of course, happy to talk about these in depth and other examples. You can reach out to us later in the slides. We'll have our email address. And we're going to hear about several other examples as we talk with the panelists. I wanted to move now to some introductions. Actually, before I do that, the 3 examples I just shared are VR examples. These are virtual reality examples. I think it's important just to take a second to distinguish VR from its sibling technology, augmented reality or AR. I know some of us are going to talk about examples of AR. To put it simply, when a user is in VR, they put on the headset, their view of the real world is totally replaced by a 360-degree digital world. So the user has a sense of presence in a simulated environment. With AR, the user is still seeing the environment in which they're standing, but the technology is putting a layer of digital content or digital information on top of the real environment. So if you imagine a surgeon who's looking down at his or her patient and seeing an overlay of medical imagery over the patient's body, for example, to guide the procedure. So that's the difference between AR and VR. For the purposes of this discussion, I'll probably use the term XR as a catch-all label for both VR and AR. Okay. So now let's do some quick introductions, and we'll start with we'll go in alphabetical order by first name. Adam, if you wouldn't mind just telling us about you and your organization and your organization's interest in XR and your role and experience with XR projects.
Yeah, sure. So I work for Centrica Storage, which is kind of a company that sits within the Centrica Group. We're a upstream oil and gas. We own kind of assets offshore and onshore, and we have a lot of frontline workforce in high hazard industries. Our kind of total industry is probably quite new to the use of VR and AR and tech, and we're starting to embrace that and really explore what it can offer us. And you know, as part of that, this year we're working with Microsoft and a company in Hull known as Visor Dynamics, and that's looking at the use of the HoloLens. And one of the kind of interests we have in that is how can we use virtual reality with the digital twins to explore competency and training, and you know, getting that into the front line, but then also taking that VR and then flipping it into the AR, which is the actual in-field use of the device to overlay that onto the plant. And you know, there's some really interesting things out of that, of how those both combine together.
Cool. And we'll hear more about some of the examples of projects you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Jason.
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, so I'm Jason. I work for PwC UK in the VR AR team there. Obviously, our role really is to work with our client base to help, I guess, well, demystify the technology, you know, separate the hype from, the hype from the reality from the hype, but also really get our clients to think about the clear value propositions of XR technology and promote the industrial applications. It's about saying to our clients, how do you solve business problems? How do you do something tangible with the tech that's going to have some lasting benefit? And I think obviously in the industry, it's very exciting. Everything's great. There's some tremendous technology, but it is about saying for people that want to get involved with it, how do you use it in the best way and where do you start?
Excellent. And also, just for everyone's interest, PwC published a report at the end of 2019, which has a look at both the present and the future of VR and AR.
Yeah.
Is it called Seeing is Believing?
Seeing is Believing is the name of the report. Yep, it's available on the web. Yeah, you're exactly right. That shares details about how we view the economic impact of VR and AR moving forward, and also breaking it down into use cases and sectors. So showing where we think the greatest value of the technology is going to be moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and that report, if I remember correctly, measures the global economic impact within 10 years at $1.5 trillion.
It's correct, just a pocket change.
And PwC is one of a few global giants that have done these kinds of studies looking at the future economic impact. Others included Goldman Sachs and Bank of America here in the US, and they're all projecting a humongous market. So I think it supports the idea that VR is not a fad. It's really an inevitable change that's going to be happening in business and society.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay, Ross.
Hi there. My name is Ross O'Brien. I'm the Digital Innovation Director for a central London NHS trust. My role and interest in VR came at the point of the Grenfell Tower fire, the disaster that happened about 2.5 years ago now in London, where we used VR to engage the local community. And my interest in VR and health has continued since then, and hopefully I can give some insight into how we're responding and using VR in terms of the COVID response at the moment as well.
Good, and I think maybe you can address that one right off the bat here. I wanted to get this one off the table first. During this global pandemic, we're hearing some words from our immersive media lexicon much more often. So words like virtual and remote are in much higher use these days when talking about alternative ways of meeting and traveling and learning and seeing a doctor. I wanted to hear from you guys as to what's the reality of the opportunity for XR as a response to the restrictions on travel and gathering, et cetera, with COVID-19, and is XR a quick solution to any of the problems that we're now facing? Ross, do you want to start, since you seem to be active at the NHS?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't speak on behalf of the whole NHS. I'm talking from my kind of swathe that my trust covers, which is about maybe a quarter of London. But certainly for us, we are seeing in the same way that the rest of the NHS is seeing, and the rest, to be honest, healthcare internationally, that a lot of the services are either the business as usual services are closing, or their staff resources being directed to other parts of the system to basically back up the frontline response. And some of the services which are closing at the moment, there's quite a significant worry in the services which are closing. For example, pulmonary and respiratory services are closing, so that the people that are particularly vulnerable to COVID aren't getting services at the moment because of the fear that A, they will spread COVID to staff, and B, staff will spread COVID to them. And one of the things that we're looking at in terms of VR is remote rehabilitation for breathing difficulties, in order that we can continue those services. So rather than simply closing the service, we're looking at working with a small company in the north of England who prescribe headsets. So headset goes out to a patient with a rehabilitation need, in terms of if they've had a previous ailment and they need a rehab, and then like you would attend a rehab facility or clinic in real life, they put the headset on and they go through the same exercises that they would in that clinic with the physiotherapists. The good thing is the technology allows us to look at the biometric data. It allows us to read the movements of the patient and make sure that they adhere to the actual protocols and the rehabilitation regime as well. So I think that for us is, it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what we could do with VR. And I think at the moment we're rapidly trying to think about, okay, all of the services which are closing because of COVID, what can we do for that? And another example of one of the things that we did in Grenfell in order to respond was to use VR to give people an opportunity, staff an opportunity to look after their own well-being. So as you know, with VR, there's a host of different kind of mindfulness apps and mental health apps and just environments which are environments of escapism. And we, in the early days of the response for Grenfell, our staff were extremely stressed and anxious in terms of that response and the gravity of what was happening and what they would what they were hearing from the people affected by the tragedy, and giving them a space and giving them a headset and saying, just use the headsets yourself, have that time and space away from the patients, and a time that's yours in a busy NHS environment and space, was something that they really appreciated. And we did some small scale studies and saw that their kind of anxiety and stress were reduced, that their heart rate was reduced, and generally they were less stressed. So that's another thing that we'll be looking at in terms of how can we keep the staff that are responding to COVID at the moment as well as possible, using VR solutions.
Cool, thank you. I want to get over to the safety component of our topic and ask Adam the next question. So you work in a field where there are physical risks, and as we talked, I learned from you about the mental health risks and certainly economic risks when stuff goes wrong. Can you talk a little bit from your experience about what advantages XR training offers over traditional methods in these high hazard industries?
Yeah, sure. So the traditional kind of method we've always had is that on-site training. So the person turns up. Generally, sometimes it's their first trip offshore or at a working gas terminal, and they will kind of be partnered with an experienced sort of personnel, and then they'll spend their entire time with them. One of the big challenges sometimes in that is that person who is then trying to train the person is also trying to do a role. And what we kind of saw with the VR was two sides. So one side is actually some people go into these roles and then realize down the line it's not for me. So a typical example of that would be offshore workers. We've had people before who have never been on a helicopter flight. They get on the helicopter flight and realize, I don't want to do that. That's not for me. They get out there and realize actually how cramped the confinement is, how challenging that is. And they really, they struggle kind of with that. So what we saw VR in one option was to really help with, people trying that out first to realize, is this for me? Can I actually do this? And the savings in that is kind of twofold. In you're not going down recruitment paths and bringing people out for that side. The other hand is actually kind of people's ability to position themselves on site. So it sounds strange, but these gas terminals can be massive, acres of space, process plant, and just getting your bearings of where you are on that plant can take quite a long time. So again, being able to freely in VR walk around that space to see what you would see out in the field, and then be able to kind of pull up, well, what is that? Oh, that's that part of the plant, that's that part of the plant. Before they come to the site, it really accelerates the training and the ability for them to learn, because they're not really kind of struggling with that whole, where am I, what do the noises mean, what do the alarms mean, all that sort of side. So in the high hazard, I think it allows us to kind of accelerate and also have very much demonstratable competence, which is another challenge we have sometimes.
So traditional methods like books and paper-based training and maybe even live role-playing or sort of non-digital simulations don't exactly convey the pressure and the sensory experience of actually being there, flying over on a helicopter, being surrounded by big loud gear and stuff like that.
Yeah, and yeah, you're exactly right. The kind of the noise and the process plan and the usual base level of noise and what that sort of familiar, we joke about it, but some of the guys who've been there 15 odd years, they can hear something and go, that's not right. And it's, that sort of ability to do that, you cannot learn it, from the traditional here's a load of drawings and here's a load of layouts. They help you to an extent, but as most people know, how do you negotiate your way around somewhere? It's through that visual map in your head. It's hard to get off paper.
Right. Okay. And Jason, I know you have an interest in the power of maybe VR, XR to affect behavior change.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a bit about what is that power, and how do we conjure or harness that power? And if you could think of an example or examples that apply to professional development or training.
Yeah, of course. I think, I think our view is that VR, XR, it's not always the solution. It's about working out what are the core mechanics of the medium. What can the medium do above and beyond any other that is unique to that? What is the power of it? And I think our belief is, and you guys have probably seen a lot of the evidence about how much more memorable, how much more compelling VR content is when it's built in the right way. And that's all built around the idea of spatial presence, the idea that in VR, it has an innate ability, a unique ability to put you in a situation you couldn't otherwise be in, i.e., you can be somewhere, you can be someone, you can be in a situation where your brain is tricked into believing that you are there, and therefore the memories we create are much like real life, the patterns, the associations, you're in a scenario. And even though it doesn't have to be photorealistic, the idea is that if you give someone enough agency in that world, if you make them feel like they belong, they have tasks, they have some form of presence in that world, what you then get is an incredible emotional connection to that content. And our belief is that if you can tap into that, so say, for example, you're a business and we work with a big bank, and you have problems with inclusivity, you have problems with your leadership, you have a high attrition of staff, for example. If you have, say, 100 senior leaders and you want to make them be more inclusive, you want to make them feel like they understand the concerns of their staff, you want to get them to understand what is making these people leave, what is making their culture suboptimal, shall we say. So if you're doing classroom-based training or you're doing e-learning or whatever it is, it's very hard to convey that message because you can't allow them to feel the emotion of their staff. You can't allow them to actually be there and experience the feelings. If you put them in VR and you put them across, you make them the staff member, you put them across the table from someone who is acting in a suboptimal way or is displaying poor leadership behaviors. If you allow them to feel like they are that person and they are suffering the consequences of that behavior, all of a sudden what you create is a very lasting memory of what that entailed. And there's lots of evidence about how this is being used in terms of racial bias, in terms of all of this great stuff, and there's a lot of exciting evidence that's come out of it around how much more, emotionally connected we are, how much more we remember, how much more we feel like what we've experienced we can take into the real world. So our belief is that regardless of the industry, every business has some processes, some things they want to improve. And it's about going, how do we tap into that? How do we allow VR? How does VR and AR become a way in which you can make your people better? And as Adam touched upon, that can even be from things like recruitment, assessment, onboarding, global mobility. All of this stuff can be done if it's designed in the way, because obviously VR and AR don't give you those benefits inherently. You have to design the content in the right way. And a lot of that actually means that the content creation bit is the smallest part. It's about the discovery, the strategy building. That's what gives you it's garbage in, garbage out, right? You have to get the strategy and the development properly. You have to get the value prop right, and the KPIs, the metrics, all of that has to be in place, and the deployment strategy to make sure that your business can actually use this in the best way. But we are massively passionate about how powerful VR can be for affecting all sorts of behavioral change when it's used in the right way.
You just made me think of a topic that Adam and I spoke about, and that is sort of the value proposition of VR or an XR project, and how a champion at an organization can push that idea through.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to hear from any of you, but maybe Adam first, since we talked about this. We spoke about some of the debates or the conversations that you had to have, or that you had to win with maybe some more traditional or more innovation or risk-averse executives at your company. So can you talk about the kind of pushback you heard, and then how you dealt with it to get support for your projects, and then if you've won over the skeptics at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and Jason will be able to probably add a bit more because he's seen it across different industries. But I know in our industry, business models and how you judge investments are very traditional: return on investments, payback periods, things like that. And with technology, it's a bit more challenging because, for one, generally the first step is like the plumbing. You need a signal based, whether it be Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or 4G kind of network covering your entire facility, and then everything else plugs on top. So the initial getting that in place doesn't really give you a direct return. You've got to think of it in very much a long term. The other challenge is the returns of technology generally. In our industry, what we see is improved efficiencies or improved safety, and improved kind of tool time and things like that. But the problem with those, then, when you're trying to justify them into the, if you're doing it as a financial numbers piece, it's very hard to say, right, I've got a 20% efficiency gain, but I'm not going to reduce my workforce by 20%. I'm getting better at doing things, and I'm doing things smarter and quicker. That will eventually get you there, where when you look across a year, you're doing more work, you're turning over more things, so therefore you are more profitable. But it's really hard to put a very solid number on that. And then when you're sat in front of people and they're saying, well, why would I invest in that? Why would I give you this? You do need kind of champions and people in those positions in your business who can have that long-term vision, see a future, and follow that path, and actually are willing to, in a sense, take a bit of a risk to invest in that. Because the flip side of it is also, especially with the energy industry, how do you keep it interesting and attractive to the younger generations and people coming into it and coming out of university and things like that? And here's a load of paper and these really, it doesn't attract them. Whereas you've also got to kind of think of that side as well.
Jason, would you add anything? I know that at PwC you have exposure to all verticals and many different types of companies.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I sit in an area of the business called technology and investments, and we sit alongside all innovative new tech, emerging tech, drones, blockchain, AI. So our PwC's approach is we work backwards from the problem that needs to be solved. It's about saying, what is the issue, whatever it may be, a cultural change thing, process optimization, whatever it may be for that business. And then it's about working backwards to say, actually, what technology or blend of technology best serves that purpose. And sometimes it isn't VR in isolation. It can be VR. We work very closely with we've got a terrific AI team. It can be a combination of things. But our view is really, it's almost about taking the tech out of it. It's saying, it's the whole idea of emotion and logic, right? If you are many people in an organization, a lot of the stuff, the decisions are made are based on emotion, particularly when it's new technology. It's cool, it's shiny, it's sexy, it's new. The problem is you have to have that logic behind it. You have to have, from the very beginning, there has to be a clear focus on how we actually going to measure this. If we're a business and we're bringing in a VR, a change or a training program, how are we as a business going to justify the ROI of that? And that, in our view, that ROI mechanism, that has to be concrete from the start. You have to have some tangible form of creating efficiencies or, whatever it is, saving money, as Adam alluded to. There has to be some core purpose that you cling on to, and everything revolves around that, because ultimately all of the other stuff, 360, CGI, MR, AR, all of that, it wraps around that core purpose, because you have to have a way of saying, when we have this in our business and people are using it, well, first of all, how do we build it in the right way that people are going to use it? We've all heard the stories of VR headsets being chucked in a cupboard somewhere and no one's using them. There has to be an actual deployment, i.e. what headsets are we going to use? How are they going to be managed? Who's looking after them? How are we going to remotely maintain them, update them? Who are we partnering with? All of this stuff is the less sexy stuff, but it has to be done. Otherwise, in that organization, people won't get the chance to get the headsets on and actually experience that. And then it's almost like with, I think with the training side, you have the kind of more procedural based stuff, and that's more demonstrable. You can have people who are using AR or VR to perform a task better, i.e. constructing something, deconstructing something. You can measure that quicker. I think if you're talking about things in terms of behavioural change, process change, it's almost like kind of football youth system, right? Because that takes a little bit of time to come through, because it's a more subtle change you're trying to affect over a given period. And what you need are stakeholders in those organisations that have the vision to understand how that's going to manifest itself, and how they, as stakeholders in that business, are going to be the ones that drive that vision forward. I think creating the content, and there's lots of wonderful companies out there that will build the content, is a part of it. But actually, everything that wraps around it is the bit, in our opinion, that actually makes a project successful or not successful. You have to have that vision from the outset.
Ross, on a similar topic, I know at least in the United States, in the healthcare vertical, we're very innovative when it comes to medical devices and maybe procedures. But when it comes to adopting sort of the trends or the things of digital transformation, our healthcare companies are very slow. How was it that you guys were able to? I'm thinking about the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and how was it that VR was presented and actually deployed as a kind of community therapy project?
It's an interesting question. I think what we're seeing at the moment in terms of COVID is similar to what we saw in the early days after the Grenfell tragedy. Essentially, you have a period of time where you've got the maximum possible opportunity for disruptive technology to be introduced. And for us, in the early days of Grenfell, what happened was essentially the story of Grenfell is that the cladding on the outside of the building was the thing that caused the fire to move so quickly, and for unfortunately so many people to lose their lives. And the cladding was put there by the local council. Now, the local council is an extension of the government, and the NHS in the UK is also an extension of the government. So we were in a position in the early days responding to Grenfell where we, as normally a very trusted agency, a very loved agency throughout the UK, were kind of lumped into this, you're the government, so therefore we don't trust you. And what we had to do in those early days was engage people en masse in their thousands to bring them into the services. And what we normally do very badly in mental health services in the UK is go out onto the street, put out a trestle table, give out some pens and a squeezy ball, and try and talk to people about really difficult subjects. And after a couple of weeks where we'd tried to engage a very angry population following Grenfell, we decided that it was not working, and we did need to do something different. And I think that environment where there's a real and present danger, there's a real and present need, and you need to do something different, is the perfect time to do something different, is to use a medium like VR. So I think the lesson that we learned is the richest body of evidence for VR in health is in PTSD. So back from the 90s, American called Skip Rizzo has built up a real body of evidence around using VR for post-traumatic stress disorder treatment. And with Grenfell being a massively traumatic incident, we thought that would be what we used it for. But like you're saying, we got a lot of resistance about using something which hadn't got an evidence base in the UK. And so what we decided was, rather than try and swallow the whole apple at once, was to take a bite. And the bite was to use VR as an engagement tool. And because of the success of doing that, because initially when we went out onto the local high street in West London and just literally started to use VR with the public in terms of whatever apps or videos that they wanted to watch, and because that led to us really successfully engaging the local community, really having very difficult conversations with people quite naturally, we were then able to iterate on that and start to create some of our own content, and then to adopt other content and to go into other areas of health with VR. So I think, going back to your earlier question, it's sometimes just about not trying to solve everything straight away, and like Jason says, kind of working backwards. Where do we finally want to get to, and what are the iterative steps that we can use to introduce the tech to people in a palatable way?
Yep.
Do you want to add anything, Jason?
No, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
I'm just wondering, in the case of the response to this tragedy where you wanted to get something deployed quickly, did you in this case have the opportunity to take your time and start small and test and make sure you had it right and just be very sort of pragmatic about it? Or was it
not one bit? And the same is happening with COVID at the moment. The thing in health that I was working with in the kind of a gap in between Grenfell and COVID was in the UK, in the NHS, we do not have an XR strategy. There are brilliant pieces of work going on all over the NHS in terms of physical rehab, post-traumatic stress disorder, mental health work, all, you name it. There's something going on. Great work in pain all over. What we don't have is one central strategy in terms of where the investment would come from, where the ROI would come from, which parts of industry would benefit most first. And I think that, for me, when COVID starts to die down again, will be my primary focus, because until we have that framework and until we have 5 key areas that we want to invest in and concentrate on, this brilliant work, and it's quite interesting in VR. VR is often rolled out. If you've got a conference about innovation in health, you'll always get like a VR section, and somebody's rolled out and said, what a fantastic person this is, this brilliant work. And then at the end of the conference, they're kind of put back in their box and they go and work in isolation again. And for me, what my aspiration will be over the next months and years will be to actually kind of mainstream and bring that strategy and vision into the NHS so that XR is used more successfully.
Cool. And that's a good segue into my next question. I think we are moving out of the realm of VR as a shiny object. In other words, like the novelty, and you see that more maybe in marketing and communications, where the shiny object is the cool thing to spend some money with. But we're moving into this world now where there are really many very compelling case studies. And yet I think XR is still in the realm of innovation. It's still considered cutting edge. It's still an R&D thing for many companies. It's a thing where the first movers are investing in VR, but maybe not the rest of the organizations out there. When it comes to professional development and training, I believe PwC is estimating a market impact of almost $300 billion in the next 10 years. So what do we think it's going to take for XR for training, XR for professional development to be ubiquitous in organizations?
I think part of the issue at the moment is there's a lot of misconceptions about VR, in particular about its scalability. And I think a lot of this is driven by, 4 or 5 years ago when VR came along, there's a lot of hype about how it was going to change the world and everyone's going to have a headset. And I think expectations got to a level, and there's a lot of content that was made, again, without that real longevity behind it. A lot of companies invested money in an experience where you would go up a mountain, whatever, you put a headset on and you're there. There was no follow-up. There's no call to action. There was no meat to it other than just it being a cool experience. I think what's happened over the years is that as the headsets have moved on, as we know, right? It's moved away from a really expensive headset, cables everywhere, £1,000 PC. The Quest, things like that have changed the game, but it takes time for people to understand that these things exist. And it takes time for people to understand that you can now remotely manage them like you would any other asset. And at the same time, there are these misconceptions that it's not scalable. It's, you know, if you look in particularly in professional development, there's a lot of belief that, oh, you know, VR is great for a pilot, but I couldn't scale that across my organization. Well, in fact, that's not the case. If you look at it, and actually we've done some studies on this, if you look at it versus classroom or e-learning based training, if you take all of the additional benefits of VR, the added emotional engagement, less distractions, you know, more recall, everything, you know, the general pleasure of using the experience. If you can combine that with the cost of having a properly defined one-to-many relationship where you have a bank of headsets, you maintain them, people can access them, you've got a proper evaluation metrics, it can be more cost-effective, more scalable than classroom-based learning with a lot of the benefits, if not more benefits. So I think a lot of it is just driven out of the fact that VR, it's taking time for people to come to terms with the fact this is not a gimmicky technology. You know, big, huge companies across the world are investing billions of dollars into these technologies. And that's not for no reason. That's because there are clear benefits to using this in the right way. So I think a lot of that is you know, being addressed, right? And there are great companies that we work with who are doing loads of work around how they can really scale, develop VR training solutions. It's just basically the whole idea of experiential learning for the masses, right? Going from, in the 60s, if you wanted to learn to fly a plane, you fly up to 60,000 feet, they cut the engine out and you hurtle down to 20,000 feet before you turn the engine back on. And then someone went, that's probably not the safest way of training, which then evolved into flight simulators where it saves time, it saves money, it saves lives. All VR is really doing is taking that concept of immersive learning and making it available to the masses, because all of a sudden, rather than £1 million simulator, you can do it with a £400 headset. And it's just taking time for people to come to terms with the premise that the whole idea, the value proposition of immersive learning is not new. It's just that VR has meant that it can now be used beyond just things like aircraft training. And there's, you know, talking about the healthcare stuff Ross has talked about, you know, healthcare is one of the most exciting areas for this. I read today about some companies in America who are giving a load of headsets to care homes in the States to help combat social isolation. I mean, it's just, the benefits are phenomenal. It's just about getting people to really understand how they can use it.
Thank you. And we have our first attendee question, which I want to get to in a second. But just first, from Adam, I wanted to hear from you what you think it will take at your company for VR and AR training to be ubiquitous or to be as common or more relied on than your traditional methods.
I think part of it is exposure. You know, our industry just hasn't had that exposure to it, and as Jason alluded to, the clear vision of how this can benefit. I mean, the one that jumps to mind when he speaks of flight simulators is, you know, we have control rooms, and every control room layout is different. You have different screens, the alarms appear in different manners. And most training that we do, you will go to a facility which has a generic control room setup, and they will simulate an incident, and they'll try and make it as similar to your control room, but it'll never be the same.
Yeah.
And you know, that costs money, that costs time, and the ability to replicate the exact you know, layout. You know, you can, even in VR, you can replicate people coming in to distract the person on the control room, on the console, all of that for what is, you know, quite a low cost for a very specific package that is for your site, that then you can train and train and train, and you can manipulate, and you can add in as you know, as the control room changes. You know, that sort of training for control room operators would be, you know, you could pass someone out on that and they've never even been in the control room. If you know, you can simulate all the different things they'll have to respond to. So yeah, just getting it past that initial people not understanding what it does, and it being a novelty and a weird kind of, oh, that's like gaming, you know, getting people's heads past that and the power it has, I think it's really going to take off, and you know, I completely believe in the figures that PwC kind of are projecting, because it's just going to take one of the big companies to kind of snap it and boom, roll it out, and then everyone will be trying to get a bit of it, I think.
Okay, and then segueing from ubiquity into our first very practical question, and it's a question about kind of the biology of VR. Someone has asked, do we think there will be more reluctance in sharing VR headsets within businesses and at public events vis-a-vis hygiene issues. I know that in Boston a few years ago, there was a conjunctivitis outbreak, a pink eye outbreak at a video game conference when the VR headset was being passed from one person to another. Let's go to Ross, our health expert on the panel.
Yeah, we've already seen it. We've already seen in some of the projects that we've got live and colleagues as well. All of a sudden, without even question, people are putting VR on the back burner, and very much the issue is the fact that you're sharing the headset. And so for us, we've had to rapidly think about consider that issue. Where our early work in terms of Grenfell 2 or 3 years ago was very much based on repeatedly giving members of the public headsets on and we would see with one headset maybe 20 or 30 members of public in the space of an hour or 90 minutes. And we just can't do that now. We need to work differently. We need to think quite carefully about hygiene standards, and it's something that was explored, but it's never been publicised in a large scale way because it's not been necessary to before. So I think clinically we'll look to keep running via prescribing headsets, but to individual users, and then. I think we really need as an industry to go out and have a campaign around how we are keeping the headsets clean and how we are ensuring infection control between users and how it is safe to do it. But I think without any communication or information into the space, we risk really kind of feeding into the stigma around it, because there are ways that you can completely decontaminate headsets, and there are better headsets than other ones. Unfortunately, some of the headsets are designed with kind of cloth or foam as their kind of standard issue. So we need to think about stuff like that. But I think it's about getting a message out there now and filling that quite empty space to burst that the stigma that could last for a lot longer.
Yeah, practically speaking, this is the Oculus Quest, which has this sort of foamy padded material that goes against your face. But I've bought the aftermarket silicone sort of condom, which is very easy to clean in between uses. And I was at, I think Ross, you and I were both at this VR conference in Nashville on healthcare in March, and everybody who was presenting, who was demonstrating their technology, was very careful to use antibacterial wipes and alcohol wipes in between uses. Okay, we have another question. Can you cover what a team would need internally to execute a VR project? So Adam addressed the idea of a champion at an organization. We haven't addressed this yet, but when we work with clients, we're usually dependent to some extent on subject matter experts at our client's location. Can you guys address, what's the right kind of team? Who are the right champions maybe at an organization? Who might they need to rely on as outsiders or vendors? Anybody want to take that one on?
I think, again, we see a real mix here. I think, again, it comes down to what they're trying to do, right? If it's an initiative that's led in terms of people change, you need someone with a vision, right? You need someone who's the person, exactly as you said, who knows their business, the subject matter expert, can help you identify what they're doing at the moment, where the problem lies, can help the people with the technical expertise, be it internally or externally, identify where the real value can be added, how a solution is going to be fleshed out, what technology is going to be used, how it's going to be accessed, kind of building that whole strategy, storyboarding the content, looking at the interactivity mechanisms, how are people going to, what's the UX, the UI, how is all of that going to work? And then it's about having people, I think, they're going to project manage that and drive that through, i.e. managing the development process, but then also leading on from that to the actual deployment bit. Who's going to take that to the people in the business? Who's going to drive that forward? And then also who's going to take the time to take all of the data that's captured in these experiences and actually report from it, who's going to assimilate all of the insights. And because there's always some upward management required, right? So it's who's going to take that data, who's going to report back to the C-suite and say, this is what happened, these are the effects. Because then all of that data is going to be used to define the next stages. Are we going to scale it up? Are we going to stop it? Are we going to expand? But again, you do need you need that optimum combination of business knowledge, subject matter knowledge, but also that technical competence to shape their vision into a solution that's actually going to add some value at the end of the day.
Okay, Adam, would you add anything based on your experience?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's a bit what Jason. It's recognizing your blind spots in that area. So we have our ISIT teams who have a wealth of knowledge around data and all the systems we have, but we didn't have anyone who sat within a kind of virtual reality or AR environment, and knowing what you don't know helps you then go and find the companies or the right people to work with. And it's very much what we touched on there is having a kind of stakeholder who sits high up enough in the business that he can influence at that higher level to try and get people's heads around it. And then and the flip side for us, because obviously this is a technology into the frontline workers, is then also being able to identify the kind of people who would embrace this. And interestingly, people who won't, because you want that full range, you want the full spectrum. There's no point in trying to bring this in and saying, loads of people will love this at your site, and then everyone hates it because you picked like the specific people you knew who were going to really go for it. So we've seen that throughout the project, is actually understanding the guys who don't like it and why don't you like it and what bits don't you like, and that's actually helped to shape the project far more than people who just love it. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
I think sorry, go on, Ross.
I would add exactly the same. We started on the premise that it would be the younger clinicians that would be the ones that picked up the VR. And actually, what we found was when we went to some of our what's the socially acceptable way to describe them, older clinicians, who would definitely say they were technophobes and weren't very good using IT or technological devices. Actually, when we sold to them what we could do with VR in health, then we saw many more people adopting it, because all of a sudden they thought, oh, this isn't just for the young tech-savvy clinicians, it is for everybody, and that worked wonders in terms of getting it out more ubiquitously. So we had the same response.
And I think businesses also, a lot of this is about being honest to say that it's not easy, right? Bringing any tech deployment inside a corporate organization or any enterprise organization is inherently complicated. Deploying iPhones, tech support, SAP stuff, it all requires time and money, but it is all about saying there is clearly a benefit to doing so. There's efficiencies, time savings, cost savings. There's an ROI at the end of it, at the end of the rainbow. It just, it's about being honest within that organization and saying there is going to be a journey that takes place to get to the end of that rainbow, pretty much.
Excellent. Guys, thanks so much. The time, of course, went by much more quickly than I thought it would. Yet I feel like we have a lot still to talk about. I hope we have a chance to meet again, maybe in person. And for those in attendance, I want to make sure you know how to get a hold of us if you want to continue the conversation. Mark, do you have a slide handy that has maybe our contact info? Mark, you there?
Yeah, he's sharing.
Okay. There we go.
Asking you shall receive. I think you should be able to see it now. Yeah.
Yep. Got it. Yes. Thank you.
So I was just going to talk through this. I mean, really, we could probably go on for another couple of hours on that, going at the pace that we were going. So thanks so much for your insights and your time. And thanks for everybody else for joining the call as well. I'm calling it a call, but it's a webinar, isn't it, essentially? I'm just so used to using Zoom now. Either way, I think it came up a few times in there that making the case for using VR or or any extra technology is absolutely paramount when you're considering any VR project. You shouldn't just dive in for the sake of it. And in that way, we're here to help. I'm just having my little moment to give a little bit of a spiel and a pitch, just to share what we can offer at Nucco Brain as well. So we do run workshops. Generally, we do charge them out, but for the people who attended this webinar, we're actually offering them out free, where we're going to help you work through some of your ideas, your initial ideas, defining the goals, which is, I think, it came up a couple of times as one of the most important things that you really need to have in your in your pocket to be able to pitch internally. And out of the workshops, we usually help develop creative concepts, the UX, what the learning outcomes might be, and then also provide you with something of a business case to help sell the idea internally. So if you are interested in that, or if you've got any other questions, I know there was a couple that came up in the chat that we couldn't quite answer in the time we had. So feel free to reach out to us at Nucco Brain, and we will make sure to get back to you on that. Just a final note before we do all sign off, we have another event, another virtual event that we're running on the 29th, so that'll be in a couple of weeks from today. And this will be more focused on communications in the age of uncertainty, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with as it currently stands. So feel free to check out on our website the link for that and sign up on Eventbrite as you did for this one. But all of that said, thank you so much for everybody for getting here and for making it work in the current circumstances. It is a bit tricky. I think that went really well, so thank you so much, guys. And if you do have any questions, like I say, reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer. All right.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Take care. Speak to you later. Bye-bye.